This presentation is entitled Capturing the Voices of Black Career Educators, a Critical Race Analysis. I'm Dr. Wanda A. Alderman. I will be the moderator for this session. And we have two presenters today, Mr. Isaac W. Jackson Sr. and Mrs. Gloria D. Allen. Please join me in welcoming our presenters. A little later in the presentation, I will give you a little more detail. This session will end at 11:45. We ask that you leave the auditorium at the end of the session so that the next session can set up and get prepared for the next presentation. The conference has provided a reflection room, room 401F, and we invite you to join us there if you would like to ask more questions or continue the dialogue. We encourage all people present at the conference to continue to interact with the scholars and especially the DC history enthusiasts. I'm going to start the conference with reviewing three very important definitions. The first, Black career educators. Individuals who have dedicated their life to educating Black children. The second, race, a social construct used as a tool to oppress, especially people of color, politically, socially, and economically. And last, critical race theory, a concept stating that the historical pattern of racism is infused in laws, policies, institutions, and is systemically practiced throughout the United States. This presentation will offer you an introduction, a brief overview. We will then hear the voice of Mr. Isaac W. Jackson Sr., the voice of Mrs. Gloria D. Allen, and we will have an opportunity to receive brief questions from the audience and, of course, a summary. We're going to start with our introduction. Thank you, Dr. Dre. W.E.B. Du Bois, back in 1960, made a statement. He believed that at that time, Black teachers would disappear, that Black children would leave public education. They would drop out of high school, and fewer would go to college. He stated that Black universities would possibly disappear. When I say brown, what am I referring to? You nailed it. I'm going to give you a brief overview of a little information before Brown. Briefly, as I kind of describe where knowledge comes from, the Greek Golden Era was the start of philosophy and the study of medicine. Yet philosophers believed that the center of knowledge came from Egypt. Greek philosophers had studied in Egypt for sometimes decades, even before the Greek Golden Era. Generally, people don't believe that the thinkers and the lovers of knowledge are from the continent of Africa. Yet, customs, readings, art, mathematics belong to Africa. Mali University had the most extensive collection of books, both in Africa and the world, over 1 million manuscripts. They had a student population of 25,000. Thus, if you don't know this, you need to ask why. Early education of Blacks by law were prohibited from learning how to read and write. Slave owners feared literacy. Yet between the 1600s and the 1700s, a few Black children did attend school, but this was not the norm. I can't help but think about a Black woman who, when she went to the United States Patent Office to file a patent for her invention, she was turned away. She was turned away because she could not sign her name. She could only make a mark. So therefore, she could not file her patent. John Chavis, ironically, in some ways, he is the first Black American to receive a college degree in 1799. I say ironically because he received the degree from Washington and Lee University. Now, imagine if more Blacks living in the United States had that same opportunity without the influence of structural racism. From the I would say about 1861, and even to the end of Reconstruction, Black educators stayed. Even when white teachers abandoned urban schools in southern cities, Black educators stayed to educate Black children. Dr. Carter G. Woodson once said, Blacks knew the value of knowledge. It meant independence, the creation of your own thoughts, power, influence, and of course, wealth. Woodson said that during slavery, Blacks were never educated, only informed about the world, and their education was subjected to the will of others. Please join me in reading the following names aloud. Vincent Collier. You don't have to wait for me. Thank you. In this, well, I guess the 1870s, 90% of Blacks lived in the rural South, but it was Black educators who taught. They taught in barns, they taught in open fields, they taught in churches, one-room schools. In one case, a Black farmer actually built a school for his daughter in the backyard of their home because she was a teacher. Whether it's Plessy versus Ferguson, was certainly supported separate public schools. In the southern states, Jim Crow laws consumed public education, even to a point in Alabama when they would collect textbooks at the end of the year and store them in the warehouse. They would put the Black textbooks on one side of the warehouse, and they would put the white textbooks on the other side of the warehouse because there was fear of contamination. Separated by housing and racial isolation, especially in northern cities, where housing determined where you lived, where you attended school, and if you were living in Harlem, New York, there was at one point no high school for Black students. If you wanted to go to high school, you had to leave Harlem and go somewhere else in New York City. Okay. Please join me in saying the following names out loud. Thank you. Black educators wrote curricula. They designed model academic programs. They established institutions of higher education. They assumed roles outside of the classroom. They were activists, union delegates, and they were role models in the community. I think of a neighbor who went to the neighborhood school, and after school, on a nice day, she was sitting on her front porch, and all of a sudden, her teacher walks by, and she did quite frequently. She would always stand up. She was so afraid she was going to come up on the front porch and ring the doorbell and ask to speak to her mother. The teacher lived just a few doors down for her. But as teachers, we were in the neighborhood. You could find us. Black educators were laced with academic preparation, yet they faced discrimination, segregation, and they were expected to fail. However, they continued to instruct Black children. They became principals. They became college presidents. Please join me in reading the following names. Thank you. Let's review our definitions one more time. Black career educators, individuals who have dedicated their life to educating Black children. Race, a social construct used as a tool to oppress, especially people of color, politically, socially, and economically. Critical race theory, a concept stating that the historical pattern of racism is infused in laws, policies, institutions, and systemically practiced throughout the United States. Doing Brown and leading up to Brown, the implementation of Brown. Black segregated schools were denied funding, monies to hire new teachers. They were often given outdated textbooks. And there were actually white educators who believed that Black parents simply had the wrong values. And because of those values and cultural practices, that was why Black children were performing lower than white children. When you talk about cultural values or practices, I think about Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house. And there were only two things I ever looked forward to, and that was Jell-O with fruit cocktail and a bowl of butter pecan ice cream. I was good to go after that. Black career educators focused on not only increasing the number of Black students finishing high school, they advocated for curriculum, they changed guidance programs, they promoted the need for Black children to finish high school, and they even asked for adjustments in the school calendar. When I was first doing some research about that one, we need an adjustment in the school calendar. In Southern states, especially, Black children went to school fewer days than white children, because after all, they were needed to harvest crops. Kind of the same concept of tote that bill and lift that hay. At one time, we represented half of all Black professionals in the United States. Half. And you better believe we took the job serious as professionals. When I look at pictures of Black women educators, they came with the hat, the white gloves, the pearls, their Sunday bests. They were dressed, as they say, to the nines. We were somebody in the Black community. People saw us not only as role models, but we were anchors in that community. Any community was proud to have school teachers living in their community. But the fear of desegregation, 38,000 Black career educators were suddenly unemployed. 38,000 with the implementation of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Imagine the economic impact on Black families. Suddenly, they're without an income. I think about a friend whose mother was the first Black woman to be a certified teacher in the state of Minnesota, and she too taught first grade for over 50 years. It was a good thing she finished college early too. But I remember her husband and she bought a home and she went to work every day. And she mentioned once that it was just so unusual, but in a little way, that many of the white families, the mother put the child on the school bus and went back in the house. She went to work. And at one point, people even asked her, why are you still working? Because we know that Black families often needed two incomes to buy that dream home and to raise their children. So imagine the impact on 38,000 families where suddenly someone was not employed. In 1963, there were 227 Black high school principals in North Carolina. By 1979, only 8 Black principals remained in public education. The contracts for Black teachers were not renewed. And no one, for the most part, thought about the psychological impact that may have had on Black teachers, let alone the economic or even the long-term impact on Black families, but also the impact on Black students. Black schools were closed as the result of trying to implement Brown. Black high schools were converted to junior high schools. The name of Black schools were changed. A different passing scale was established for Black teachers on the national teaching exam. Desegregation allowed the very people who opposed desegregation to create new racially based policies and laws to control desegregation. After Brown, 68 years later, today we face resegregation in both public schools and communities, the absence of Black career teachers. Only 7% of public school teachers are Black. Less than 2% are Black men. Over 52% of all students attending public schools are students of color. The largest generation of Black career educators walked away from the public schoolhouse. The largest generation are mostly baby boomers. They are and have retired from teaching careers. And when they walk out the schoolhouse, there is no one standing outside their classroom to replace them. Voices that speak from before, during, and after Brown. Voices with the most profound history about the struggle of desegregation in public schools. They are the voices, as I said before, with the most profound history about the struggle of desegregation in public schools, because they are voices that speak to all levels before, during, and after Brown. Yet no one is capturing their voice, the history of Black career educators. Do you value Black history? Or as Du Bois said at the very beginning, someday Black teachers will disappear and no one will teach Black history. We will now move to the voices of our presenters who will answer the following questions. As a Black career educator, how do you define your career? How did racism influence your career as an educator? We will first hear the voice of Mr. Isaac W. Jackson, Sr. Mr. Jackson is a native Washingtonian and a retired educator. A graduate of Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, he received a master's degree from Federal City College and continued his graduate studies at George Washington University. Please welcome Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Haldeman. Can you hear me? Thank you so much. And this is a great opportunity. Good morning to everyone. All right. I think it would be fitting if I start in this manner, understanding that I am retired. I am a former educator, but at the same time, I still remain an educator. So with that in mind, I think it's fitting that I think and talk about the things that formulated my mind, what took place in my head, the type of role models that I had, where I accomplished certain things, what was going on in my mind during the time that I was in the school system, in the time that I was in school. I attended DC public schools here in Washington, DC. So right now, again, I'd like to go back a moment and determine and talk about those things that have set my mind in motion, my social skills, educational skills, my thinking process, and what have you. I am the third child. I have a brother, older brother, and an older sister, who both as well attended DC public schools also. My parents were not educators. My mom completed the 5th grade. My dad completed the 3rd grade. Now, mind you, I don't want to talk about age or anything of that nature, but as I go through this particular presentation, you begin to ask yourself, well, he must be an older guy. However, I'd like for you at this time to join me as we remember or go back a bit. Your first encounter as far as attending school, your first encounter as far as education, understanding that education first begins first in the home. Your parents are your first teachers, your parents. And then beyond that, education begins in the school. Well, I had a pretty good life experience. I like to say it that way, living experience. So before I get into my professional aspect of teaching, professional aspect of administrator, and my time as far as the DC public schools were concerned, in my administrative aspect, again, I want to give you a little bit of background. If you will, again, try to remember your first experience, or can you remember back to the 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade? How far back can you remember? I can't remember that far. As far back as the 2nd grade is what I can remember. And so what I'd like for you to do at this time now is to take a trip with me and close your eyes just for a brief moment. Close your eyes and try to think back. Can you remember how far back? What grade do you remember? How far back can you go as far as your experience? And think about those teachers that were with you at that time, their names and what have you. Open your eyes. Think about your experiences. Again, I can't think any further back than the 2nd or 3rd grade. Now, I might be exceptional, I don't know. You might can go back to the kindergarten or the pre-K or pre-K. I can't go back that far. But I ask you to do that because I wanted to share something with you, an experience that I had during that time. And I believe it was either in the 1st or the 2nd grade. And we're talking about critical race analysis. I'm not going to name any schools at this time or name teachers at this time. However, again, I asked you to go back because I had an experience that I'll never forget. I had an experience, I believe it was either in the 1st or the 2nd grade. I want to share this with you. I cannot remember my teachers' names during that particular period, because we're talking about 70 plus years as far as me going back. And again, the things that helped to shape and mold my mind, to mold my thinking. And this experience, I don't know if it did mold or have any effect upon me. And I struggled. I struggled with whether or not to share this experience. But I said, well, if you don't share it at this time, you might not have another opportunity. And I've never even shared this experience with my parents 70 plus years ago. I never shared it. I'm sharing it right now for the very first time. And again, I don't know if it affected me in any way that had me to think any differently towards the field of education, what I did beyond that moment, or what have you. But I'm going to share this experience with you right now. I cannot, again, envision or remember names. I can only see at this time flashes of people. I'm going to share that the first Black teacher that I encountered was in the 4th grade. So the experience that I am sharing with you now is something that I still think about. I ended up crawling as a child, 6 or 7 years of age, on the floor. I don't know why. I don't know why I was doing this. I can't remember what the moment was. However, as a disciplinary procedure, I was made to crawl up and down the hallway at the school where I was. I was embarrassed. Well, it had an indelible experience upon me, period. And I say that because, as you can see, as you can hear, I'm talking about it right now, 70 plus years later. I'm talking about it. What effect did it have upon me? I crawled up and down the hallway, I know for a good 5 minutes or so on my knees. And I can remember those persons who were responsible for having me to do this. I remember them with their arms folded and saying to themselves, he had it coming. This is the action. This is what he received as a result of crawling on the floor in the classroom. Of course, we all know that that's a form of corporal punishment as far as school system is concerned, but I'm not sure what was happening or what was taking place during that time. We're talking about the early 50s during that particular time, so I'm not quite sure, but it stuck with me. It stuck with me. Did it have an impact upon my thought process? Did it have an impact upon how I think now? I don't think it did, but I still think about it because I'm talking about it and I'm sharing it with you. I'm sharing something with you that I never shared with my parents before. So again, I had you to close your eyes and I had you to think. And as you begin to hear me and listen to what I'm saying, think about yourselves. Don't think about what happened to me. Don't think about what I went through, but think about yourselves at the age of 6 or 7. And anything that I say today, don't focus upon me, focus upon yourselves. It's important that you do that because if you are educators and at this particular point in time in your lives, you want to think about what would you have done, the types of what process would you have taken, what would that have been the proper process or what have you. And again, understanding and knowing that corporal punishment is outlawed. It is outlawed in the public school system, is outlawed all over, period. And again, I wanted to share that with you so that I could continue as far as my thought process and my thinking process. And again, hoping and understanding it did not have an impact upon my thought and the way I think, the way I look at folks, look at people. It did not have an impact. I truly don't believe that it did. But that is what took place, and that is what happened to me during that time. I often wonder if I had shared that with my parents, what would have happened? What action would they have taken? Would they have gone up to the school? Would they have confronted the teacher, principal? I don't know, because I didn't share it. And we all know that there are things that take place in our lives that we don't share, period. And that was one of those things that took place in my life that I did not share, period. My parents believed in education, they believed in religion, and they were strong advocates of the learning process. My dad, because of the three children, my brother and my sister, we were in a very small home, one that didn't have a lot of room, but fortunately enough, we were able to move out of that and move into a home that had, we thought it was a palace, 3 bedrooms, and upstairs, downstairs, basement, recreation room, and what have you. It was heaven as far as we were concerned, because where we had come from, it was only a 1 room, a dining room, kitchen, bedroom, and that was it. So we didn't have a lot of room and a lot of space. So again, I'm sharing this with you because does it have, or did it have an effect upon my thought process? I'm not sure. I cannot tell you that it did or whether or not it did not. I'm a product, again, remembering back in the early 50s when schools were integrated. I attended a school in the 5th grade during that time. I think it was the first year of schools being integrated during that time. And even though schools were integrated, as children, we didn't understand what was going on and what was taking place. Schools were integrated, but still segregated amongst children, because I know that we as Black children played amongst ourselves and white children played amongst themselves. And I also noted that prior to the integration process, I also noted that, again, remember I said I only can remember my first teacher, Black teacher, as far as the 4th grade. But 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd, as far as I remember, we're all white teachers. So I don't remember any Black teachers until the 4th grade. So again, I don't know if that had anything to do with my thought process, thinking process, or what have you, and so on and so on. I ended up going to middle school, high school, where I was in middle school. I had the same situation because of the integration process. I had a mixed white, Black as far as teachers were concerned. Same thing in high school, white, Black as far as teachers were concerned. I had no thought process about race during that time at all. All I know is that I was receiving my education, and I knew that I needed to do well to please my mom, to please my dad, as far as my educational process was concerned. I ended up on the track team and also ended up playing football, where I received a scholarship as far as football was concerned. Ended up going to Morgan State College, where again, I had a mixture of white, black, all different races and what have you, Indians, what have you. Again, I had no, as far as race was concerned, they had no bearing upon my educational process. I did what I had to do as far as school was concerned and coming out of school. In 1968, 1967, we were fortunate enough to be a part of what you call football team, the Citrus Bowl. It's in Florida. It was then called the Tangerine Bowl during that time. And we played a school which was predominantly white. Morgan, as you know, was predominantly black. And we played, we won, and 50 years later, we were invited back to Florida to play in Florida, and it was then called the Citrus Bowl. But we had made history as far as that was concerned. We didn't understand it during the time, but after we came back 50 years later, it was explained to us that we did make history during that time. The first white school to play a predominantly black school during that particular time. So we were honored as far as the process was concerned. And again, that was a form of history. As far as the DC Public Schools is concerned, I had a tremendous experience as a teacher and as a principal, and working with children, predominantly black children, and what have you. And today, my success is them coming back with informing me about their progress, what they have done, what they have accomplished, because what they have accomplished, I have accomplished as far as being a part of their lives, as far as teaching them, as far as coaching them, and as far as being a role model. And all of you know that role models are here, and role models, as you enter a school building, are everywhere. As soon as a teacher walks across the door sill, he or she is a role model. You're watching how they walk, how they talk, how they dress, and how does that affect you as far as your thought process. So again, that is where my thought process has been built. That is where I am at this particular time. My success, again, is the lasting relationship with my students, productivity as far as my students were concerned, my being impressed by my students, doctors, lawyers, educators, and what have you. And they share those stories with me even today when they come back, when they see me in the mall, when they see me in the stores. Mr. Jackson, you remember this, you remember that. That's what makes me feel so great that I was a part of the educational process to help to educate children during that particular time. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. By show of hands, how many educators are in the room? I think we're outnumbered. Awesome. We will now hear the voice of Mrs. Gloria D. Allen. Mrs. Allen is a retired career educator and a native Washingtonian. She received her undergraduate degree from Howard University. Shall we say it for them? You know. And a master's degree from George Washington University. Mrs. Allen is a recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching Math and Science, and she served as the district director for the National Teachers Association. Please welcome Mrs. Allen.
Good morning. Are you hearing me? Good, thank you. First things first. This is April 2nd, and I have this little pin on it says Mom. This would be my mom's 98th birthday today. If she were with us, it would be that,
Very
and
good.
I will always celebrate
Very
her.
good.
She passed when she was 93, so that was an outstanding journey, but she was part of my life, of my growth, of my education, of my focus. I'm named for her. She was Gloria, I'm Gloria. So I could not be here and not offer that as a way to continue my life and journey, but also to share that with you. One of the things that there were 2 or 3 things that's supposed to be a target for the portion that I'm going to share with you. I'm going to flip the script a little bit because one of the things we're supposed to describe is how racism influenced the career as an educator. Washington, D.C., when I was born, was a segregated city. We as Negroes, we were called Negroes then, it's Blacks or African Americans now, but Negroes lived in a certain part of the city. We were together. The affluent and the struggling all lived together. That was just the way Washington, D.C. was. There are always negatives to something like that, but there's the flip side to that coin, and that's part of what I want to share. On my block, we had our home. It was semi-detached, but to the left of us was a school. So from the side of our house all the way to the end of the corner, there were no natives. It was just the school, the schoolyard, the playground. Across the street was a small housing development. I had a couple of buddies over there, but that was there. But on the corner was a single home, a wrought iron fence all around it. It was beautiful. It had grass lawn, and it was a physician. That's where we lived. We were together. Whether we wanted that, that was not our design. That was racism. That was what created that in this city. But the flip side of that is that we were together. We went to school. We went to the same schools. So the doctor's daughter and the struggling parents all went to the same school. We were all in school together. We became friends. It had nothing to do with racism. We were all together, forced into that, but there are some pluses that out of that. In my home setting, I am 4th generation HBCU. Education is everything. When you go to school, you learn. You don't play, you don't cut up. Of course we did, but you don't do anything to embarrass your family. You don't ever have a note come home and your parents have to come up to school to see the teacher. That's a big no-no. Education was everything. So that impacted my life and behavior. Our teachers were strong, powerful, focused, very professional. No one wore pants to school. That was unheard of. The teachers took education and the delivery of information very seriously. And that impacted how I was teaching, or what happened with me as I went into teaching. Teaching was serious and important, but it was also a number of other things. To define my career, I would say it was engaging, exciting, enjoyable, challenging, fun, and critical. When I started, I came into the system in the summer, which later had an impact, which caused me to transition to a different school. But most teaching positions were established in the spring, but I came in the summer. And that the first teacher I saw walk into the building was this one. She had her baby in a bucket. I had my baby in a bucket. They are now grown and have given us children, and our sons are both in their mid-30s. But at that time they were in baby buckets, and she was the first one. And she even showed me where the childcare lady was around the street who was going to take care of both of our children. That's just how long they've known each other. But in that setting, that particular school was odd because it was a 5-8. So 5 and 6, 7 and 8 were in one building. I'm secondary trained. My science teaching was for high school, junior high school, high school. So in order to stay in that building, I had to take some elementary courses to upgrade my certification. So I went from, in that setting, I went from 7-12 certification to K-12 certification. So I was able to teach elementary as well. At the end of that first year at that particular school, I was excessed. I had no idea what that meant, what was going on. I was still new to the system. But because I had come in later, then I was released early. The school where I was sent was called Bunker Hill Elementary. That changed my life. That impacted my life. There were celebrations there in education, a predominantly Black school. There were maybe, there might have been one white teacher there, but most of the staff was Black, strong people who loved and focused on education. As I walked in and introduced myself to the principal, she sat down. The first thing she said was, "Science is not a special subject," which meant that it wasn't something that came extra. It was important, it was key, it was central, it was focused. It's not just math and reading, and science. She even shared that the parents there the PTA was very active, and the parents there were attempting to set up a science room or a science lab. So she was just making it clear to me what the overview or focus for science would be in that particular school. As I worked in the system and focused with other teachers around the city, we had departmental meetings then. I became what was called a science coordinator, and there was a big grant connected to that. Long story short, I was able to work with the principal, and we established 2 fully staffed elementary science labs in that elementary school. One was for one room was dedicated to kindergarten, 3rd grade students. They went in, the tables were smaller, the desks were smaller, the sinks were smaller, everything was fully equipped. And then the adjoining room, or the room next door, was for the 4th through 6th grade students. And that was it had a trifacial sink, lab tables, all fully equipped. So that was a celebration. And I will share 4 other celebrations. We were asked to, one of the information pieces that you might not know about that we got from our moderator was to share some celebrations in the education. So I'm going to share those. While at that school, we each worked, each classroom teacher, each special subject area person worked hard. We were very committed and very excited about the content areas that we had, so much so that it was hard for parents to get their children into school. It wasn't, there was always a waiting list to get into Bunker Hill during that time. So much so effective and so successful that the Department of Education awarded us, after quite an interviewing and a process, awarded us the Blue Ribbon of Excellence. That's the kind of school we were. It was strong, it was positive, and we didn't, we all, it was a range of personalities, but still committed to teaching each and every child who came to us each and every day. It was about that. So that's another celebration at this particular setting. Because of I think generally because of the general success of the school, there were a couple of universities in the Brookland area, a couple of universities near. One of the professors of student teachers, prospective teachers, spoke with our principal. We found out later they had spoken, but he announced to us that a class, a university class would be coming into our building. It would be coming and would be sitting in our various classes. just to get a sense of education, of teaching, process, children, etc. They did come. They came in numbers. The larger numbers kept sitting in my science space, but we just went on without teaching, went on with a normal day. Long story short, the next week, that professor got in contact with my principal and called me. And she invited me to step into her office. So after I'd finished that school day, I went and sat and talked with her. She had a plan in place. And what came out of that was that I became an associate professor at the university, teaching the contents and components of elementary science to those prospective elementary teachers. So that's another celebration area that happened while in this particular school. At the same time, and during the entire time of teaching, I was part of NSTA, National Science Teachers Association. I was able to work with them and build a strength around the components that would help all teachers across the country, not just here, but educate. Science education is critical. Science education is important. So that's what we are. That's what we were about. So through some processes and what have you, I became a district director at our national organization. That means I went on to the governing board. District director means there are about 17 or 18 district directors. What that means is that you have 2 or 3 states that with whom you work. You support, you set up conferences, or when we have our national organization, we would meet, speak with each other, support each other. So I became a district director for 3 years. While still teaching full time and still working, but that was just another opportunity that presented itself in this teaching, in this business of teaching, this world of teaching, this passion that I realized that I do have for teaching. While still at Bunker Hill, and I've been in 3 schools, still at this elementary level that when I was at Howard and we were doing a training, I had said, I'm not going into elementary schools. That this was not a focus of mine, but I found out I fell in love with them. It was something that was just, it was a good fit. It was something that was helpful for me. So while there, I did an environmental program with our students, and one thing led to another, and I was awarded the Presidential Award for Excellence in Teaching Science. That was a fairly big deal to meet the president and to have him shake one's hand and to celebrate. Others across every state has those representatives. As I come to closure, I want to share that we are not rare. We are not unique. Teachers who give and celebrate and work students are all over the city, are all over the region, all over the country. And many of you are part of that, and you are a celebration. But for me, science, I say, well, one of the things about the career, science is critical. I was removed from the elementary level. I went into the middle school. They're a little wacky, but I love them too. They're too old to be big and too big to be old. So they were weird. I was designed for them as well. But when I'm teaching a 7th grade student, and that student, and I'm sharing life science, I'm saying the 3 big groups in science are plants, animals, and fungus. And when a 7th grader says to me, I'm not an animal, that's a problem. That's critical. Science needs to stay at the elementary level. You can't start science at 7th grade. You can't start science in middle school or junior high school or whatever levels. It has to start in kindergarten. Celebrating shapes and sizes and color and form and texture. All of those things can happen in science. So I celebrate those who are at all levels K college. But science, but I've done 40 years of teaching. I stopped because I had an auto accident and I decided, maybe it's time. My car was crushed and I wasn't, that was a message. It was time to step away, but I still love, appreciate, and respect education. So with that, thank you for your time.
And setting this presentation up, I wanted to make sure we had time for the audience that we could, ask questions, or whether you could ask questions of us, and just to start a dialogue. Remember that this presentation is about capturing the voices of Black career educators. And as we know, we have become fewer and fewer and fewer. Is there a question for myself or the presenters? Yes.
What your thoughts are about desegregation for Black students? In other words, there's a kind of tension there from what I gathered is, in a way, desegregation did not do us a good service here in DC. And I know my mother always said that she got a much better education at Dunbar. It's segregated.
My mother went to Dunbar also. Yes.
So I'm just curious,
Yes.
I'm putting that out there. I know it's a very contentious thing, but I'm just curious your thoughts.
The part of your question, are you saying, what do we think about desegregation or the resegregation?
Right, well, what the root cause, what happened when schools desegregated to Black students? Because as you're saying, right now, I'm training people to be teachers, and most of the students I work with are white.
Mhm.
And I don't see any students of color in these teacher preparation
Mhm.
programs.
Mhm.
And so I'm also curious because when you read about the history of Dunbar, for example, a lot of these schools have gone down in terms of academic excellence and things like that. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in relation to segregation.
Mhm.
Connected with that.
I think Mrs. Allen touched on it very much, in the fact that as educators, we took pride in being the very best that we could be. This was our livelihood. What we are seeing, and you're absolutely right, 80% of all teachers entering education today are white and are likely to be female. Now, where there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, what we see are what we call some of the microaggressions of racism. For example, diversity and inclusion has been taken off of the national teaching exam. So what does that mean? That means that colleges and universities that are preparing teachers no longer teach a course or don't have to teach a course in reference to diversity and inclusion. We see subtleties in terms of testing and testing elements. I can't help but think about elementary tests where they ask the child, they show them a teapot and ask them what's missing. Well, the spout is missing. But if I've grown up in a household where I don't have a teapot and mom heats everything up in the microwave, how do I know the teapot's missing, a spout? And what is really frightening and what we all need to be concerned about, I think, going forward, is certainly the pandemic is going to have a major, major impact on public education. During the pandemic, 3 million students were not accounted for. And most school districts didn't send anybody to look for them. They dropped out, dropped away, and did not come back. So we're going to perhaps already recognize that predictions for the future of work, especially for Black males, was already in jeopardy. And so we can only imagine what a pandemic will do in terms of what schools, how schools will really provide an adequate education. I was doing some research when I wrote a book 2 years ago, and I came to the conclusion that I actually thought that when it comes to going to high school, that eventually parents are going to pay for their child to attend a high school. Because one, there are not enough teachers in public education, class sizes are large, and unfortunately, especially children of color, get left behind. We already see a wealth gap between Black and white families. So if I have the resources to provide a tutor for my child and I can make up that difference from the public school, then I will. But if I don't have those resources, then what will happen to the children, whose parents can't afford that? So I think we will begin to see perhaps a widening of the gap between students, perhaps even dropping out of school. And what most school districts are not dealing with is the mental health of students. And seldom do school districts deal with the mental health of teachers. So I hope that kind of answered your question in a way of what we see going forward. Yes,
Is this okay, or do I need to come down?
we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm a teacher, and I did not experience racism growing up in DC. I experienced racism going to high school in Maryland and beyond. White women teachers, white colleagues disenfranchising my Black colleagues, and it's just very uncomfortable. And so I'm a teacher who's considering stopping teaching, and I'm wondering what your advice is for Black teachers who are unsure of whether to stay in the classroom.
Girl, you need to come talk to us. Or you want to handle?
Didn't you teach her?
Huh?
Is that who you?
Yeah, yeah.
This is your teacher, yes? That's why.
Yeah. I don't think we can afford to walk out of the classroom. We just can't. It is important, and it's important, especially for children of color, because, there's something about understanding a person's culture. To give you a brief example, I left the collegiate world, came back to secondary teaching, and taught in high school. And occasionally I have 2 or 3 Black males. Of course, they were twice the height of me. Come in my classroom, want to sit in the back of the room, and put their heads down and play with their cell phones. And of course, all 5'2" of me would confront them, go up in their face and say, we're not having this. I got 2 just like you at home. I don't play that. You're going to take the hoodie off, put the phone away, and you will not walk out this door unless you learn something. But understand that culturally, I'm okay in doing that. And so that's why I say the role of having someone that you can identify with, maybe as a role model, or someone who isn't afraid of you, so to speak, and isn't going to let you waste your time in their classroom just because you're being quiet and, I don't want confrontation. There are so many important elements when Black teachers teach that we can't even list them all.
My strongest, some of my strongest and most ardent, adamant students were not Black, were not African American. Teaching is not a color. Teaching is the opening of a mind, the opportunities to learn, to grow, and the source of that information. Keep in mind that Greeks and Romans studied in Africa for years, in Egypt. They really did. And then they came back with that. It's not about color as it is about the various ways to transfer information. I use art in my science. Scientists use math in English and art. Scientists have to, when a scientist makes an observation, how do you hold observation here? No, you sketch it. So that's art. Some you can see and figure out, oh, what did the others? You have no idea what that is. But so the artistry, the ability of the person to use that art varies, but it is a component of that. That's what you're delivering. So whether you're in a setting, and I've been in a setting where I was not well received. I've been in a setting where I was so stressed and hurt, I collapsed on the parking lot and had to be taken to the hospital. And I was out for 2 months. That's the kind of ugliness I did experience at one of the schools here And then I was released. And as I was being, as the school year ended, I did come back, the school year ended. And I was going to I was going to go to another place. And there was a small core of white teachers who really came after me with claws that I just unexpected. But I still taught. But it didn't work out. So as I was packing my things to leave, these three little ladies came to me with little smiles on their faces and said, "Our children loved you. We're looking forward to seeing you next year." They had no idea what else was going on. So teaching for the sake of teaching is what one does. If you're teaching for color, then maybe this is not the area for.
Do not walk away. We need you.
Yeah.
We definitely need you. So it's a struggle. It's a knockdown, drag out fight, but hang in there.
And to piggyback a little bit on what Gloria was saying, even as a college professor, I was asked by undergraduate students once, how is it you're qualified to teach us? I didn't answer that because it wasn't going to be pretty. But what it said was that they were not used to seeing a woman of color in the classroom. And very much so. It's not always where we teach, but just embracing and expanding who teaches. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
No, we're down to a minute.
Yes.
Could you talk about why African Americans aren't getting teaching more and nowadays, what kind of advice you have to like encourage more of that?
There's been a lot written about that. In just a few seconds, I can tell you that at one time, especially for educated Black women, it was one of the few jobs that we could obtain. And certainly generations today have multiple options. And I think teacher pay is another one. It doesn't necessarily attract, although we live in the DMV, which is a high rent area. So our starting salaries for teachers is comparable to undergraduate students finishing college, except maybe for business majors. But does the scale keep up with the cost of living? And so, yeah, that can be a part of it. Personally, I got a chance to teach 152 days a year. I had all the federal holidays off in 2 months during the summer, and I can't imagine a better profession. Yeah. But yeah, people have taken different options. All right, we're going to wrap up. As I mentioned earlier, you can join us in the reflection room 401F, and we really, really appreciate your attending our presentation. And as Don Cornelius would say, peace, love, and happiness.
Mhm.